I bought the Coronet in 2019, which was either the best or worst decision I've ever made, and I still don't know which. It was a single-screen theater on Mill Street in Harwich, population 4,200, give or take. Built in 1947 as the Harwich Grand, closed in '03, sat empty for 16 years. By the time I walked through the front doors with a building inspector and a flashlight, the lobby carpet had gone to black mold and the ceiling plaster over the balcony had dropped in sheets. But the bones were good. Steel-reinforced concrete, Art Deco facades, a raked floor with original iron seat brackets still bolted in. The projection booth upstairs still had the old carbon arc housings, enormous and black, like the heads of two dead insects. I wasn't a cinema person. I was a restaurant manager who'd burned out, moved back to the town I'd grown up in, and sunk my inheritance into a building because I missed the version of Harwich that existed when I was 10. The one where you walked somewhere on a Friday night and saw people you knew and sat in the dark with them and it meant something. My wife, Dana, was cautiously supportive. Our daughter, Lily, was 7 and thought it was a castle. It took 14 months of renovation. I put in 180 seats, real ones, upholstered, with cup holders. A digital projection system. Proper sound. Concessions in the original lobby with a popcorn machine and a glass candy case. I kept the original ticket booth, this gorgeous little wooden kiosk with a brass window, and I hired Patty Lucerno, who'd worked the box office at the old Harwich Grand when she was 17, to run it again at 63. She cried her first shift back. Told me the booth smelled the same. We opened October 2020, which tells you everything about my luck and my timing. For the first year, I was running a museum that sometimes showed films. 10, 12 people a screening. Sometimes 4. I'd stand in the back of the house after the lights went down and watch the movie play to a mostly empty room, the sound bouncing off 200 square feet of unoccupied red velvet. Dana told me I looked haunted. I told her I was just tired. But it caught on. Slowly, the way things do in a town like Harwich. I started a weekend classic series, Hitchcock, Wilder, Kubrick. I ran a family matinee on Sundays. I partnered with the school district for field trip screenings. By 2022, we were doing 3 shows a day on weekends and breaking even. By 2023, we were making a modest profit and I'd hired 4 part-time staff. Patty still ran the box office every Friday and Saturday night. She kept a running count of every ticket sold in a green ledger she'd bought at the office supply in Brennan, 20 miles east. She didn't trust the POS system. She told me computers forget things. I'm telling you all this so you understand, the Coronet was mine. Not just legally. Emotionally. I knew every seat, every wall sconce, every crack in the plaster rosette above the center aisle. I knew the sound the furnace made when it kicked on at 5 p.m. in winter, a low, shuddering groan that rattled the brass fixtures in the lobby. I knew which seats squeaked, which armrests were loose, which section of the balcony still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke from decades that predated me. I knew this building the way you know a body you live in. Which is why I noticed. It started in February of last year, 2025. A Thursday. I was running a 7:30 showing of an old Coen Brothers film, something I'd programmed on a whim because the distributor had it cheap. 11 tickets sold. I knew because I'd been at the box office myself, Patty only worked weekends, and I'd torn each stub and dropped the halves into the lockbox under the counter. 11 people. I watched most of them come in. A couple I recognized, Gene Pardo and his wife, the Okafor kid from the high school, Mrs. Tierney, who came to almost everything. The movie ran fine. Credits rolled. I flipped the house lights up from the panel in the back hallway, walked out into the auditorium to do the post-screening check: trash, lost items, seats up, heat down. Standard. I counted the seats that were down. 14. Not 11. 14. I stood there for a moment, hands in my jacket pockets, staring at the rows. The seats were the spring-loaded kind. They flip up automatically when you stand. A seat only stays down if weight held it there. I walked the rows. Seats B7, B8, B9, the couple and someone next to them, probably. Row D, a cluster. Row F, row H. Back row, 2 seats on the aisle. I counted again. 14. 3 extra. I thought, someone snuck in. Side door, maybe. The emergency exit on the east wall had a push bar that sometimes didn't latch right in cold weather. I checked it. Latched. I checked the other exit. Latched. I walked back through the auditorium. 14 seats down. 3 people I hadn't sold tickets to had been in my theater. I didn't think much of it that night. Harwick is a small town. People are casual about things. Someone's kid wanders in, a friend holds the door, whatever. I made a mental note to check the east exit hardware and went home. Then it happened again the following Tuesday. 8 tickets sold. 11 seats down. Then Friday. 31 tickets. 36 seats. I told Patty about it that Friday night while she was closing out her ledger. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said, "Honey, people sneak into movies. They've been doing it since before I was born." 5 extra people in a 31-person screening. She shrugged. Maybe they came in late. Through what door, Patty? She didn't answer that. She just wrote her number in the ledger and drew a neat line under it. I started paying closer attention. Not obsessively, I had a theater to run, but deliberately. I'd note the ticket count at the start of each screening, then count the seats after. I kept a log in the Notes app on my phone. Just dates, ticket count, seat count. Simple. Over the next 3 weeks, the discrepancy appeared in 9 out of 14 screenings. Always more seats down than tickets sold. Never fewer. The gap ranged from 2 to 7. The average was about 4. It didn't correlate with the film, the day, the time, or the weather. It didn't happen every screening. But it happened most of them. I installed a counter, one of those little infrared beam units, at the main entrance. The kind that clicks every time someone breaks the beam. I mounted it at knee height on the door frame between the lobby and the auditorium, where everyone had to pass through. First screening after I installed it, 22 tickets. Counter read 22. Seats down, 27. 5 people were in my auditorium who did not enter through the front. I checked the emergency exits again. Both latched from inside, no sign of tampering. I checked the projection booth access, locked, and the only key was on my ring. I checked the old balcony stairwell, which I'd closed off with a chain and a padlock during renovation. Chain intact. Padlock locked. I even went into the basement, which was just a concrete utility space with the furnace and the water heater and some electrical panels, and checked the old coal chute that had been sealed with a poured concrete cap in the 70s. Sealed. There was no way in except the front door. I considered cameras. I should have installed them when I renovated, but I'd been over budget and they felt like an afterthought for a single-screen theater in a town where the last reported crime was a mailbox baseball incident in 2016. I ordered a basic 4-camera system online. 2 for the auditorium, 1 for the lobby, 1 for the back hallway. They arrived on a Wednesday. I installed them Thursday morning, running cable along the crown molding so it didn't look terrible. I angled the auditorium cameras to cover the seating from the front corners, wide enough to see every row. Thursday night. 7:30 screening. A documentary about a piano tuner. 9 tickets. Counter, 9. I went up to the projection booth after I started the film, opened my laptop, and pulled up the camera feeds. 4 quadrants, gray-green night vision. The lobby was empty. The back hallway was empty. The auditorium showed 9 people in their seats, scattered across the usual clusters, middle center, back aisle, 1 loner in the front row who was probably Darren Moss, who always sat in F1 because he said it felt like being inside the movie. I watched for about 20 minutes. Nothing unusual. People shifted, someone went to the bathroom and came back. The documentary played on the screen, blown out to white in the camera's exposure. I went downstairs to check the concession stock. Came back up 40 minutes later. Pulled up the feed. 12 people. I stared at the screen. Counted again. 12. 3 people were now seated who had not been there 40 minutes earlier. 2 in row G, near the center. 1 on the far aisle of row C. I rewound the footage. I watched it at 2x speed, scanning every frame. The lobby camera showed nothing, no one entering after the film started. The back hallway camera showed nothing. The auditorium cameras showed the 9 original attendees, sitting, watching, occasionally moving. And then, at 8:47 p.m., there were 12. No entrance. No movement in the aisles. No one walking to a seat. Between one frame and the next, or close enough that the camera's motion detection compression didn't register a distinct event, 3 additional people were seated. As though they had always been there and the camera had simply failed to record them for the first 40 minutes. I watched that segment 4 times. The 3 new figures were perfectly still. Seated naturally. Facing the screen. One of them, the one in row C, appeared to be leaning slightly on the armrest. A normal posture. A human posture. There was nothing visually wrong with them except that they had not been there before. I saved the footage. After the screening, I counted the seats. 12 down. I didn't sleep well that night. Dana asked me what was wrong. I told her I was worried about a plumbing issue at the theater. She said, "It's always something with that building." And she was right, but not the way she meant. The next evening I tried something different. I didn't go up to the booth. I stayed in the auditorium. I sat in the back row, farthest seat on the left aisle, where I could see the entire house. Friday night screening, a crowd pleaser, we had 44 people. I'd counted them myself as they filed in. I sat in the dark and I watched. Not the movie. The audience. For the first hour, nothing. 44 silhouettes in the dim reflected light from the screen. People laughed at the right moments. Someone's phone lit up and went dark. Normal. Then, around the 90-minute mark, I felt, and I want to be precise about this, I felt the room get heavier. Not hotter. Not colder. Heavier. The way a room feels when someone steps into it behind you and you know they're there before you turn around. A shift in the air's density. A faint pressure change, like the building had inhaled. I looked at the rows. I couldn't count them in the dark. Not accurately. But I knew the shape of a 44-person audience in a 180-seat house. I'd seen it hundreds of times. I knew the pattern of occupied and empty, the rhythm of heads against the screen's glow. And the pattern had changed. There were more heads. Not many. A few. But enough that the silhouette of the audience looked different than it had when the lights went down. I didn't move. I sat there for the remaining 30 minutes of the film, my hands on my knees, watching the audience rather than the screen. The new figures, I couldn't tell exactly which ones they were, only that the crowd was denser than it should have been, sat perfectly normally. They didn't move unusually. They didn't stand out. If I hadn't been counting, if I hadn't been watching for exactly this, I would never have noticed. The credits rolled. The lights came up. I stood and looked out over the house as people gathered their coats, their bags, their kids. 44 people filed out past me. I watched every one. 44. But when I walked the rows, 51 seats down. 7. I pulled the camera footage that night after everyone left. Same result. The lobby camera showed 44 entries. The auditorium cameras showed 44 people for the first 86 minutes. And then, without visible transition, 51. The additional 7 were scattered throughout the house, never clustered, never in the same row, never adjacent to each other. Distributed. As if they knew where the gaps were. As if they were filling in. I started dreading the part of the night where I walked the rows. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, the extra seats were always empty by then, their occupants apparently gone by the time the lights came up. But because the number was growing. 2, 3, 5, 7. On a Saturday night in early March, with 68 tickets sold, I counted 81 seats down. 13 extra. Nearly 20% of the paid audience, present but unaccounted for. I went to see Dale Britton, who'd been the building inspector when I'd bought the place. I asked him, casually, I hoped, whether the coronet had any history I should know about. Any incidents. Any stories. Dale is 67 and has lived in Harwick his entire life. He looked at me the way people look at you when they're deciding how much truth you can handle. What kind of stories? He asked. I don't know. Anything unusual about the building. Before it closed. He was quiet for a while. We were standing in his driveway. He'd been loading mulch bags into his truck. Carl Odom ran the place from 74 to 98, he said finally. Before it went to the chain that shut it down. Carl was a good operator. Kept the place nice. But he had this thing about the late shows. What thing? He said the late shows always sold better than the early ones. Not at the box office. In the room. I waited. He said if he ran a 9 o'clock, he'd sell maybe 30 tickets but the room would feel full. Like 100 people. He said you could feel it. The air was different. He said the building liked having people in it. The building liked it. Dale set down the mulch bag he was holding. I'm telling you what Carl told me. He wasn't a drunk. He wasn't crazy. He ran that theater for 24 years and he said the same thing every time anyone asked. The building has an appetite. Those were his words. For what it's worth, Carl's mother told him the same thing when he took over. She'd worked there since it opened. What happened to Carl? Retired. Moved to Brennan. Died in 2011. Heart. Did he ever? He didn't mind it, Dale said. He said it wasn't a problem. He said they were good audiences. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. The building has an appetite. I reviewed 2 weeks of footage that weekend. Dana took Lily to her mother's in Canton, which gave me the house to myself. I set up at the kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad, and I went through every screening, frame by frame during the transition windows. Here is what I found. The additional occupants always appeared during the film. Never before, never during credits, never during previews. Always once the feature was running. They appeared in seats that were empty but flanked, adjacent to or near a real ticket holder. They never appeared in an empty section. They filled gaps within the existing audience, as if they needed proximity. And they were always gone before the house lights reached full brightness. In the footage, I could see them in their seats during the credits, motionless, and then in the seconds between the last credit frame and full illumination, they simply weren't there anymore. No movement. No exit. Just occupied, and then not. I tried to zoom in on their faces. The resolution wasn't good enough. They were shapes. Human-shaped, human-sized, human-postured. Wearing what appeared to be clothing. One, in a screening from 2 Saturdays prior, appeared to be wearing a hat. I noticed something else in the footage that I almost missed. The real audience members nearest to the additional figures showed no reaction to them. Nobody glanced sideways. Nobody shifted away. Nobody leaned over to whisper, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" The extras were, as far as the actual audience was concerned, simply there. Unremarkable. Part of the crowd. But I also noticed, and this is the part one keep coming back to, that the real audience members nearest the figures appeared to be more engaged. They leaned forward slightly more. They laughed slightly louder. Their body language, on the footage, read as people having a better time. As though the presence next to them was doing something. Not threatening. Not draining. Enhancing. The building has an appetite. No. That wasn't right. The building had a function. I was still processing this when something changed. March 22nd. A Saturday. I was running the 9:15, our latest screening, the one I'd started offering once the audience base grew enough to justify it. A thriller. 41 tickets. I was in the back row again, watching. The pressure shift came earlier this time. Maybe 30 minutes in. Earlier than it had ever been. I felt the room fill. I didn't count, I was getting used to not counting, which bothered me, but I was, and I sat there in the dark and watched the audience, and the audience watched the film. And then, about an hour in, I heard something. Not from the movie. From the audience. Laughter. But the scene on screen wasn't funny. It was a tension sequence, a woman hiding in a house, a man searching room by room. The audience was silent except for the laughter. And it wasn't coming from one place. It was distributed, the same way the figures were distributed. A low, pleasant, communal chuckle, rippling through sections of the house that didn't correspond to the real audience. The actual audience didn't react. They kept watching. They didn't hear it, or if they did, they interpreted it as something normal. Background noise. The building settling. Their own breathing. I heard it. It lasted about 4 seconds and then it stopped. The film continued. The audience continued. The room settled. After the screening, I walked the rows. 53 seats down. 12 extra. I pulled the audio from the camera system that night. The cameras recorded it. Faintly, under the film's soundtrack, there was a layer of sound at 8:47 p.m. that the onboard mic had picked up. Not laughter, exactly, when I listened through headphones. More like the acoustic signature of a full room, the murmur, the rustle, the collective breath of a large audience, compressed into a few seconds. It sounded like 200 people sitting in the dark, but captured in a burst, a pulse, as if the room was remembering what it used to contain. I saved the file. I labeled it March 22_audio. I didn't show it to anyone. I was scared. I want to be clear about that. Not panicked, not paralyzed, but scared the way you're scared when something you've been ignoring becomes undeniable. The numbers, I could rationalize. The footage, I could question, compression artifacts, exposure errors, my own exhaustion. But I heard the sound. I was in the room. And the room was doing something. I thought about closing. Canceling the 9:15 screenings, at least. Going back to 2 shows a day and hoping it would stop. But I kept thinking about what Dale had said. Carl didn't mind it. He said they were good audiences. And I kept thinking about the data. The nights with the highest discrepancy, the most extra figures, were also the nights I received the most positive comments from actual patrons. Great crowd tonight. Best screening I've been to. There's something about this place, you know. People came back more often after those screenings. The Coronet's reputation was growing not in spite of this phenomenon, but, I was becoming increasingly certain, because of it. The extras made the experience better. They were audience. I kept the 9:15 running. April was quiet. The numbers held steady, 3 to 10 extras per screening, scaling roughly with the size of the real audience. Bigger crowds drew more of them. The smallest screenings, the Tuesday matinees with 6 or 8 people, rarely showed any discrepancy at all. Whatever was happening needed a threshold. A minimum viable audience. I stopped sitting in the auditorium during screenings. I went back to my routine, start the film, check concessions, do paperwork in the office, walk the rows after. I stopped reviewing the camera footage. I knew what it would show. I realized, doing what Carl Odom had done. I was accommodating it. I was managing a theater that had more audience than it sold tickets to, and I was letting it happen because the theater was working. The Coronet was thriving. Word of mouth was extraordinary. People drove from Brennan, from Clarkfield, from 40 miles away, because they'd heard it was a special place to see a movie. And they were right. It was. Then Lily came to the Saturday matinee. May 3rd. A kids' movie, animated, something bright and loud. Dana dropped her off with her friend Sophie and Sophie's mom, Karen. I sold them their tickets, because Karen had Sophie's little brother too, and watched them file in. The house had 26 people total. A decent matinee. I started the film and went to restock the candy case. Came back 30 minutes later and glanced at the lobby camera feed on the monitor behind the concession counter. 26 entries. Normal. I flipped to the auditorium feed. 34. 8 extras. In a Saturday afternoon kids screening. Something cold moved through my chest. Not because the number was unusual. It was within normal range. But because my daughter was in that room. My daughter was sitting in a seat in a dark theater next to things that appeared from nowhere and disappeared before the lights came up, and I had known this was happening for 3 months, and I had let it continue because business was good. I walked to the auditorium doors. I opened them as quietly as I could and stood in the back, letting my eyes adjust. The film played. The audience sat. Kids' silhouettes were easy to distinguish from adults, smaller, more animated, constantly shifting. I could see Lily's outline in the middle section, recognizable by the way she sat on her knees to be taller. Sophie was next to her. Karen was on the aisle. I scanned the rows. There was a figure sitting directly behind my daughter. Row E, center. Lily was in D. The figure in E was still. Not shifting like the kids around it, not leaning or adjusting. Just sitting. Facing the screen. I couldn't make out features. Just the shape of a head and shoulders, slightly taller than the seat back, motionless in the reflected light. It could have been anyone. Any adult who'd bought a ticket and chosen that seat. I had 26 real people in the room and not all of them were accounted for in my visual scan. It could have been Mrs. Tierney, or Jean Pardo, or any of the regulars who came to Saturday shows. But I knew it wasn't. I stood there for the rest of the film. 92 minutes. My feet ached and my back stiffened and I didn't move. I watched the figure in E behind my daughter, and it didn't move either. When the kids in the surrounding rows squirmed and giggled and kicked their seats, the figure sat still. When the climax of the film hit and the children cheered, a gorgeous, chaotic sound that filled the room, the figure remained motionless. When the credits began, I reached for the house light panel. I brought the lights up fast. Faster than I'd ever done. No gentle dim, no gradual transition. Full brightness, immediately. The audience flinched. Kids shielded their eyes. Karen looked back toward me with an annoyed expression. And for a fraction of a second, a duration so brief I couldn't swear to it in any formal sense, but long enough that my body responded before my mind did, long enough that my hand on the light panel went rigid, I saw the figure in row E. Not a shape. Not a silhouette. A person. A woman, middle-aged, with short dark hair and a cardigan, sitting in the seat behind my daughter, looking directly at me. Not at the screen. At me. Then the seat was empty. Lily ran up to me in the lobby afterward, happy, flushed, talking about the movie. Sophie was pulling on Karen's arm. Karen was saying something about the lights, that was a bit much, don't you think? And I was nodding and apologizing and looking at Lily and thinking, she sat behind you for 92 minutes. She watched the movie over your shoulder. She was close enough to touch your hair. I smiled at my daughter and told her I was glad she had fun. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in the kitchen and tried to think clearly. I was not afraid of the extras. That was the problem. I had been living with them for months. I had accommodated them. I had benefited from them. The coronet was successful because the room felt full even when it wasn't, because audiences had experiences there that were measurably, palpably better than they should have been. The extras contributed to this. They were part of the ecosystem. And they had never, as far as I could tell, harmed anyone. No patron had ever reported feeling uncomfortable, or unsafe, or watched. No one had ever noticed them at all. But one of them had sat behind my daughter. And one of them had looked at me. The first meant they had no boundaries, or at least, no boundaries I'd assumed. They didn't avoid children. They didn't avoid people I loved. They went where the audience was, without distinction. The second meant they were aware of me. That changed things. Not the math. Not the phenomenon. It changed what I was willing to accept. I canceled the next 3 days of screenings. Told Patty it was a projector issue. Told the staff the same. I spent those 3 days in the theater alone. I sat in every section, every row, at different times of day. I sat in the dark with the screen off, with the screen running test patterns, with a film playing. I sat in silence. I sat with every light in the building on. I walked the aisles. I stood in the projection booth, looking down through the small rectangular window at the empty house. Nothing happened. No pressure shift. No sound. No figures. The room was empty and stayed empty. The infrared counter read 0. The cameras showed bare rows. On the third day, I played a film, just for myself, alone in the house. An old musical. I sat in the center section, the spot where the image is sharpest and the sound converges. I watched the film. Nothing. They didn't come for an empty room. They didn't come for one person. They needed an audience. A real one. A minimum number of people sharing the experience of watching. And then they joined. I reopened on Thursday. I told myself I'd watch carefully. I told myself I'd intervene if something changed. I told myself the woman in the cardigan had looked at me because I'd broken the pattern, I'd slammed the lights on, I'd disrupted whatever protocol allowed them to arrive and depart unseen, and she'd reacted the way any startled person would react, by looking at the source of the disruption. I told myself that and I almost believed it. Things were normal for about 2 weeks. The extras returned. 3, 5, 8, the usual range. Patty's ledger and my seat counts diverged by the usual margin. The camera footage showed the same pattern. Audiences continued to rave about the coronet. A regional paper ran a piece about the revival of small-town cinema, and they used us as the centerpiece. There's something about the coronet, the writer said. It feels like the movies used to feel. Like you're part of something. I read that line 3 times. Then, on a Wednesday in late May, I was locking up after the last screening. Everyone was gone. Staff had left. Patty had gone home after the Friday and Saturday shows, so I was alone, doing the closing checklist the way I always did: seats up, trash cleared, exits locked, heat down, lights off, front doors locked with the deadbolt from outside. I was walking the rows, row A, clear, row B, clear, and I stopped at row G. There was something on the seat. G12. Center aisle. A piece of paper, folded once. Notebook paper, the lined kind. I picked it up and unfolded it. In neat, small handwriting, the kind of handwriting that takes its time, that forms each letter with deliberate care. Thank you for keeping the lights on. I stood in the empty auditorium, holding the note, and the furnace kicked on in the basement, and the building groaned the way it always did, and I was completely alone, and I read the note again. Thank you for keeping the lights on. I put it in my pocket. I finished closing. I locked the front doors and walked to my car and sat there for a long time. They had never left anything before. In 3 months of observation, the extras had produced no physical evidence of their presence other than the seats they pushed down. No objects, no marks, no traces. They arrived during the film and vanished before the lights. They were audience and nothing more. But one of them had written me a note. Which meant they had hands. They had paper and a pen, or they'd acquired paper and a pen. They had language. They had gratitude. They understood that the coronet existed because of a choice I'd made, and they were thanking me for it. Or they were telling me something else entirely. Thank you for keeping the lights on. Not the theater. The lights. The projector. The screen. The thing that brought people into the room. The thing that created an audience for them to join. I didn't tell Dana. I didn't tell Dale. I put the note in the filing cabinet in my office at the theater, in a folder I labeled maintenance. June. July. Summer was our best season. Lily was out of school and came to the theater almost every day. She'd sit in the lobby and draw or read, and in the evenings, she'd watch whatever was playing. She had her favorite seat, D7, left of center. She said she liked it because she could see the whole screen without tilting her head. I watched the cameras more carefully when Lily was in the auditorium. The extras appeared as usual. They always appeared when the audience was large enough. And on several occasions, one of them, I couldn't confirm it was the same one, but the shape was similar, the posture was similar, sat in the row behind her. Not always E7. Sometimes E8, or E6. But always in proximity to my daughter. And always still. Always watching the screen. Lily never noticed. She never mentioned feeling cold, or crowded, or watched. She seemed, if anything, happier at the movies than anywhere else. She told Dana that the coronet was her favorite place in the world. She said, "The people there are really nice, Dad." I said, "Which people?" She said, "Everyone." I found the second note in August. Row G again, but seat G4 this time. Same paper, same handwriting. She has your eyes. I closed the theater for a week. Told everyone it was for maintenance. A plumbing problem. Dana was confused because I was home every day, not at the building doing repairs. I told her I'd hired a contractor. She didn't press it. I spent that week thinking about what I was going to do. The rational options were clear: sell the coronet. Walk away. Take my family out of proximity to a phenomenon I couldn't explain, couldn't control, and couldn't predict. But I kept circling back to the same set of facts. No one had been harmed. In the entire history of the building, if Dale was right, and Carl's mother had known about it since the theater opened in 1947, 78 years of continuous occupation, and no one had ever been hurt. The extras appeared, they watched, they enhanced the experience of the people around them, and they left. They were, by every measure I could apply, ideal patrons. They didn't talk during the film. They didn't check their phones. They didn't spill anything or leave trash. They watched. What they were, I don't know. I've stopped trying to answer that. Whether they were people who died in those seats over the decades, or something the building itself generated, or something attracted to the collective act of watching, or something else entirely, I don't know. The note suggested intelligence. The note about Lily suggested awareness of me specifically, of my life. But the notes were also kind. They were not threats. They were not demands. They were the words of something that was grateful and observant and possibly lonely. I reopened the coronet at the end of August. I didn't change anything. I kept the schedule. I kept the 9:15. I kept Lily's access to the Saturday matinee, though I now sat in the auditorium during every screening she attended, in the back row, watching. The figure, her figure, the one who sat near Lily, appeared at every screening my daughter attended. I could identify her now, or thought I could, by the stillness. By the posture. Always one row back, always slightly offset, like a person who'd chosen her seat to avoid blocking anyone's view. In September, I found a third note. Not on a seat this time. On the concession counter, after the last screening, placed neatly beside the register. Same paper. Same handwriting. The 9:15 on Saturdays is my favorite. The room fills up differently after dark. Below it, in the same hand. You should run more musicals. I laughed. I stood alone in the lobby of the Coronet at 11 o'clock at night and I laughed, and the sound bounced off the tile floor and the Art Deco ceiling and the old brass ticket window where Patty Lucerno sat every Friday and Saturday, and it came back to me altered, the way sound always does in a room that's been holding voices for almost 80 years. I started running more musicals. I'm still running the Coronet. Lily is 9 now. She still sits in D7. The figure still sits behind her, or near her, one row back. I've stopped counting the extra seats. I've stopped reviewing the footage. Patty's ledger and the POS system still disagree, and I've stopped trying to reconcile them. Here is what I have not stopped doing: I lock the doors at night. I check every row. And every few weeks, I find a note. They're always polite. They comment on the films, usually. One said the Hitchcock retrospective was the best programming we'd done. One asked, gently, if I'd consider replacing the seats in the balcony section, because they were the originals and not what they used to be. One, left on the seat closest to the east exit, said simply, "We remember this place when it was new." I keep every note. The maintenance folder is thick now. I should be afraid. I know I should. Something is in my building that I can't see, can't explain, can't control, and it knows my daughter's face and it knows my name and it sits in the dark with the living and watches what we watch. But I think about what Dale told me. Carl Odom ran the Coronet for 24 years with whatever this is, and he died of a heart attack at 79 in a hospital in Brennan with his wife beside him. He wasn't consumed. He wasn't destroyed. He was a man who ran a theater that had more audience than it sold tickets to, and he accepted it, and he lived his life, and the building went on. And I think about the last note I found. It was in October, on a Tuesday night. A small screening, 9 tickets. An old film, black and white, something most people have forgotten. I found the note on D7. Lily's seat. Lily hadn't been there that night. No one had sat in D7. The note said, "We were here when your daughter laughed for the first time in this room. August 14, 2021. The animated one about the fish. She was in her mother's lap. Row F, seat 9. We have been here for all of it. Please don't stop." I checked the date. August 14, 2021. I didn't remember that specific screening, but I checked Patty's ledger, she'd been working that night. 13 tickets. I checked the POS system. 13 tickets. I checked the seat count I'd scribbled on a post-it that I'd found stuck to the bottom of my desk drawer during a cleaning months later, a habit I'd apparently started and abandoned in the early days before I was keeping proper records. 13 tickets. 17 seats. They'd been there from the beginning. I fold the note and put it in the folder with the others. I turn off the lights in the office. I walk through the lobby, past the brass ticket window, past the candy case, past the poster frames where this week's film smiles out at an empty room. I set the thermostat to 52. I check the exits. I turn off the house lights, and the auditorium goes dark, that specific, total dark that only exists in a room built to hold nothing but a screen's light and the people who come to see it. I stand there for a moment in the doorway. The building settles. The furnace ticks. 180 seats sit empty in the dark, spring-loaded, upright, waiting. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they are. But I know they'll be back tomorrow night, and so will I, and so will Lily, and so will Patty with her green ledger, and so will the people of Harwick who drive to Mill Street on a Friday because they heard there's something special about the coronet, something you can't quite put your finger on, something about the way the room feels when the lights go down. Full, they say. It always feels full. I lock the front doors. I check that they're locked. I walk to my car. The marquee light stays on behind me. It stays on all night, every night. I've never turned it off. I don't know who I'd be turning it off for. And I don't know, this is what keeps me up, the thing I circle back to at 2 a.m. when Dana is asleep and the house is quiet and I'm staring at the ceiling. I don't know if the coronet is haunted, or if it's hungry, or if it's something else. Something I don't have a word for. A place that was built to hold an audience and has simply never stopped, even when the tickets say it should. I don't know if they're watching the films. Or if they're watching us.